We have been charged with looking after the next generation, making this a world that they want to be in. And had somebody said to me, like 30 years ago or less, we're going to have this thing called the internet, and it's going to have lots of free, violent pornography, I would have said, no, there's no way we're going to sit back and allow that to happen. And you know what? I would have been wrong. I am still shocked at just what we bring our kids up on.
What if the biggest influence on how young people understand relationships, consent, bodies, and sex isn't coming from parents or schools, but from the media they consume every day? Pornography is no longer hidden. It's woven into young people's culture, showing up on social media, in group chats, in memes, and just a few clicks away online. And yet, for many adults, even saying the word pornography still feels uncomfortable. Welcome to the P Word podcast from Culture Reframed. I'm one of your hosts, Dr. Mandy Sanchez. In this debut episode, we explore one of the biggest social experiments of our time: how hypersexualized content, pornography, social media, influencer culture, and algorithms are no longer separate conversations. They exist within the same digital ecosystem, shaping how young people understand sex, relationships, consent, intimacy, and themselves. Gail and I discuss the roots of Culture Reframed, the public health approach to the harms of porn on youth, and why the one big talk is not enough. Join us in going beyond the talk.
So let's get started by introducing ourselves. So I'm Gail Dines. I am CEO and founder of Culture Reframed. We've just celebrated our 10th year anniversary. I've been writing and researching and lecturing about the porn industry for well over 30 years. And how I actually got into this was when I was in my early 20s. I saw a slideshow from Women Against Pornography. I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was stunning. And I remember looking at these images, which, by the way, I am nostalgic for, given the level of violence today in pornography. But I was looking at images from Playboy, Penthouse, Hustler, and others. And what struck me was, how are women and young people going to survive in a culture with this level of misogyny and violence? And so basically, it was like my whole kind of world shifted from under me. And I was in the middle of writing my doctorate on sexism in education. And I called my advisor and I said, I'm changing my doctorate. I'm actually writing it on the sociology of pornography. And I always say this thing got me. It just was clearly, once I saw it, I knew this was what I had to do. So I was a professor for many years. And then about 10 years ago, stepped down to become a professor emerita and to basically found Culture Reframed. We have now become national, international in the 10 years we've been around. And we are really one of the few organizations, probably one of the only ones in the United States, that takes a scientific, research-based approach. And we'll be discussing more about that later. But now I'd like to introduce Dr. Mandy Sanchez, Mandy, who is our program director.
Well, hi everyone, my name is Mandy Sanchez, and like Gail said, I'm the director of programming at Culture Reframed. And I got my start about 20 some years ago when I was researching at a small university in Southeast Ohio. I was looking into women and how they're navigating their stay leave decision making in abusive relationships. And we started asking questions about when they were getting ready to leave their relationships, what they were going through and how they were experiencing violence. And they started talking about pornography, and they were talking about how their partners were viewing it, how their kids were being exposed to it. And so we thought we might be onto something. And so we went to the professor at the time and we said, there's something that you might need to know about this. And the more we started asking, the more they started sharing. And sooner than later, we found out that about 80% of them had some type of pornography use in their abusive relationships, and it was connected to the violence that they were experiencing. So fast forward on to about 20 years of researching and studying violence against women and the influence of pornography and the harms to children. I started just talking about it over and over and over again. And of course, in academia, it's really hard to get anyone to pay attention to what you're doing. And reading Dr. Dines' work and just really being an avid listener to young women talk about their stories and their struggles growing up in a pornified culture. And so about a year before I was ready to get tenure, I heard about the opening at Culture Reframed, and I applied and took a leap of faith, and now I'm here writing programs and speaking all over the country and talking about porn every day. That's what we do. So
I think you're underselling yourself. Because really, you transformed the organization. I mean, we were focusing a lot on pornography and a bit on social media, but with you coming in and really getting the understanding the connections between social media like TikTok and Instagram and pornography. I mean, it was a transformative moment for Culture Reframe because we realized we were only looking at part of the picture. And once you started to show the research and what you'd been doing, I mean, it filled it out. So we got a really good view of the kind of ecosystem that exists between social media, the hypersexualization, and how it basically leads into, of course, the porn sites like Pornhub.
Are you a parent or caregiver who's unsure how to bring up the topic of hypersexualized culture and pornography to your tween or teen? Culture Reframed offers free courses to help you start this conversation with clarity and confidence. Visit the courses section of our website, culturereframed.org, to learn more.
So when we were figuring out what to call the podcast and the kind of work that we do, we kept thinking about the word the pornified culture, the hypersexualized culture. And then we realized you can't use the word porn and you can't use hypersexualization. Although we're absolutely inundated with this, we couldn't use it in our podcast. And it's rather bizarre that here we are as a group that's critical of pornography and hypersexualization, that we can't speak about it. So, Mandy, talk about how we got to where we got.
Yeah, so the last couple days, Gail and I have spent together and we've been lecturing together, and we tell the story that often we get asked to do our lectures, and sometimes people will tell us, well, you can come and lecture at our school or our organization, but you can't say the word sex and you can't say the word pornography. And we think, what are we gonna say? How are we gonna do this? And we usually find a way, but we sometimes ask them, like, did you check out our website? Have you looked at what we do? And so we're sitting on the couch and we were just trying to think about, what we want to call this podcast, because we don't want to get flagged, we don't want to offend anyone, but we want to stay true to who we are. And we were just thinking, and I thought, well, it's just kind of the P word. It's the word that nobody can say, but everybody sees.
Doing it and seeing it.
Everybody's seeing it. Everybody's exposed to it, but it's the word we can't say. It's just the P word. And so that was when the name was born. It's the P word because it's the hush hush word that has so much taboo and so much stigma. Yet it is what we're talking about. It is the word that everyone says. And in one of those places just recently, we were told that we couldn't say that word unless someone said it. And then within the first 30 seconds, someone said it. And I thought, okay, well, we can say it now, right? So we decided to call the podcast the P word. And it's beyond the talk. And one of the reasons that it's beyond the talk is because that one big talk is so outdated. We as parents can't have the talk anymore because it's so long, it's so onerous, nobody wants it, you don't want to do it, your kids don't want to hear it, and it's really just outdated. So we want to go beyond the talk on that micro level. And I know that Gail wants to go beyond talking, and we do too, because we're activists and we want to move beyond that. I'll let Gail talk about going beyond just talking, because that's where we really want to go with the podcast and with Culture Reframed as well.
At deep at heart, I'm an activist. I like to go out there and be a disruptor, which I have done for 30 odd years around this issue. So, I mean, we've been involved in, as I said, age verification legislation. To get onto a porn site, you have to have third party age verified that you're over 18, which makes it a much more cumbersome process for children to go on, which is what we wanted. Also, we work with a lot of legislators. We've traveled the world giving consultation. We really feel like, talking isn't a beginning point and a micro, very important thing to do. But then you can basically scale up into doing activism. And we'll be talking a lot about activism and having activists on the podcast. And ultimately thinking that, as citizens, we have to do something here. We can't sit back. And I always say in lectures, at some point, a young person is probably going to come up to you and say, "Where were you? What did you do when you let all this happen?" And there's two answers to that. And one is, sorry. And the other one is, I fought with everything that I had to make this a culture that will help you flourish, be joyful, help you develop intimacy, all the things you need to put in place to become a healthy, life-loving adult. And I did that. And if we change the I to the we and say we did that, you know what the next sentence will be? We won. Because, as activists, we are unstoppable. When you think about the changes that we have made, also, especially as women who were founders of most movements that's made this world, somewhat worth living in, of the labor movement, the movement to stop kids having polluted water, all of these kinds of organizations. So we have to think also collectively. And I know this is a big topic, and people say, but don't you despair at the side? No, no, you know why? Because first of all, if you despair, you're going to give up. And that's exactly what the industries would like. And secondly, you can't live in a state of desperation. I mean, we have been charged with looking after the next generation, making this a world that they want to be in. So I think collectively, the ability to do this. And, I was once on a radio show in Canada, and the host said to me, "Gail Dines, aren't you pushing a boulder up a hill?" Well, yes, we are. But that's what you do. You push boulders up hills to make this world livable. So, we are so lucky to have found a life of purpose and meaning to make this world a better place. And, you can't do everything. You take your bite of the apple, and our bite of the big apple is pornography, social media, helping kids navigate their way, helping parents, helping other professions. That's what we do. And by doing that, you feel energized, you get angry, you get sad, you get all of these emotions, but ultimately, you don't feel like you're a bystander to your own life. You are an actual active citizen working to improve the world. So that's what we want to do.
Yeah, and it's interesting because as I was reading Pornland, you talk about this being one big giant social experiment, and I really connected to that because I thought pornography does seem to be this, the availability, the accessibility of porn as it is everywhere and making such an impact. And I always wanted to ask you in person, what did that mean? Because I felt it as a young person growing up, and I see it now as, we've kind of just thrown kids into this experiment, and we're just kind of waiting to see what turns out. So, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Without porn critical sex education, young people learn from the resources that are available to them, including pornography, a resource that is neither helpful nor accurate. Culture Reframe's free and customizable sex education curriculum for children 13 years or older incorporates the harmful effects of widespread pornography. Access it for free in the courses section of our website, culturereframe.org.
Yes, because as I was researching the porn sites, etc., for Pornland, I was thinking to myself how specifically I had in my mind young boys who get to this between 9 and 11.
Yeah.
And what does it do to them? That was really the question. And we had research to show, but, I sort of, on a visceral level, I was thinking about my own son and what would have happened if he would have stumbled across this, or it would have come at him when he was, 11, 12, and thinking how different he would be than the man he is today. Now, this is an experiment, and I don't remember signing any consent form to be part of this. Anyone out there remember signing a consent form to say, I will participate in this experiment to see what happens when we flood young people with pornographic images, especially at the age when they're really developing a sense of their own sexuality, who they are, when their brain is expanding in all different ways. I was just thinking, what kind of a future are we going to set? Because we don't know. What we do know from the research is that it's not going to be good.
Right.
Okay. And that's why really Culture Reframed started, is that we have to do something in many ways. So at the moment, what we're finding out, of course, is that this is leading to depression, anxiety, more sexual violence on the part of boys, some on the part of girls, but not that much. And that was the kind of experiment I'm talking about. And then we speak to parents. What we heard and what was so important was that things were going crazy with the phone, because at one point, parents, before we got the mobile phones, parents had just kind of figured out what to do, like have a computer in the middle of the room, don't close the door, and then all of a sudden, the phone. And that's when a lot of parents feel they lost power, because you could take this phone anywhere, put in boobies or butts or whatever, and there the kid has immediate and free access. You see, that is the experiment here, is we have never showered kids with hardcore, violent, cruel images what they can get free within 5 seconds, basically. And had somebody said to me, like 30 years ago or less, we're going to have this thing called the internet, and it's going to have lots of free violent pornography, I would have said, no, there's no way we're going to sit back and allow that to happen. And you know what? I would have been wrong. I am still shocked at just what we bring our kids up on. And, we feel at Culture Reframe that we have to step in, we have to do something, and we're doing lots of things which will come out with more podcasts. But I think one of the things we've really done well is we've raised awareness as to the harm. Pornography is no longer just a punchline in a joke.
Right.
It's no longer like, the thing where you're elbowing it. It is part of the culture, front and center. And I think in a way the pornographers laid the ground for their own destruction on some level, because it got so hardcore so quickly, literally overnight.
Right.
So that was the experiment.
And you talk about the public health approach,
Yes.
right? And the public health issues, and there's not a lot of organizations that do talk about pornography from a public health approach. And I think that that's really unique, and that's what gets Culture Reframed a lot of respect and a lot of buzz. And I'd like to talk a little bit more about that, the public health issue.
When we were sort of planning out and how this came about was very unexpected. I mean, I thought, I was going to be a professor and an activist, and then suddenly at a conference for wealthy women who were philanthropists, I was offered a spot to talk, and a group of philanthropists, women, came up to me and offered money to start a non-profit. And of course, I thought this never happens twice.
Right.
Money doesn't fall into your lap twice like
Yeah.
that. So we brought a group of people, all my friends who had been studying, colleagues and friends, and we said, how do we approach this? Where do we even start, given this juggernaut? And we realized we have to approach it from every which way. And what does that is public health. It brings to the table people who normally do not sit together. So we bring academics, we bring activists, lawyers, doctors, neuroscientists, kids, which we're starting now on that program. And what I like about it is it breaks down the silos. So you haven't got one area where you're working in domestic violence, one area where you're working in rape, one area where you're working in child sex abuse. We look at it wholly as sort of a natural extension of what's going on, because it's so wide and vast in the culture that we need to bring as many people to the table as possible. And so we had a lot of meetings, and obviously public health was the one area that breaks down disciplines, breaks down silos. I do think that's what makes it unique, is we are interested to hear from everybody, including parents and kids, everyone at the table, because only collectively, ultimately, can we tackle this huge problem. So that's how we started with the public health approach. And it was actually a great way to begin, because then it didn't limit us. It opened up all the avenues for which we could approach this problem.
And that way everyone has a seat, everyone can talk about it. You de-silo that work and bring a voice to everyone.
What attracted you to the public health when you sort of saw what we were doing?
Did you know Culture Reframed partnered with children's advocacy centers to develop resources that support practitioners in the field and help child victims of abuse? This innovative approach to addressing child sexual abuse incorporates an understanding and response to the harms of pornography exposure. Visit the courses section of our website, culturereframe.org, for access to our free library of CAC resources.
I think it was because I saw so many people siloing their work. No one was, like so many people were doing their own thing and staying in their own lane. Like I come from a domestic violence, sexual assault background, right? That's the work where I was coming from. It was always, anti-trafficking work was staying in that lane. Domestic violence work was staying. Even among domestic violence, sexual violence, it was very much siloed, and you just stayed in your own lane. And this was kind of the tie that binds, like everybody was being affected. And so why do sexual violence prevention and not talk about pornography, right? Mm-hmm. Why talk about rape prevention or, digital literacy and not talk about pornography? And there's why talk about anti-trafficking and not also mention the harms of pornography? Mm-hmm. And it was just such a way to get in and talk about the real public health harms. And, pediatricians, why are we not talking? Yeah. Why are we not talking about this? And so it was just the thread that connected everyone.
Well, upstream and downstream.
Up and down, right?
Yeah, and down.
And I think that's what made it so appealing and so attractive and so safe, really, that you could have that space and a common ground. Mm-hmm. It provides that common space where everyone can come, and there's really no shame or blame in that space and that conversation. And there was this disillusionment in academia where you're kind of like, no wait, there are 40 years, there's lots of decades of research that shows the public health harms of pornography. So I think that is what was so attractive about that and that framework, coming at that issue with the public health framework is just so important because it doesn't exclude anyone.
What I realize as well as you're talking is that because we didn't silo it, it also allowed us to look around the whole ecosystem of media, like Snapchat, TikTok, Instagram, and understand again the downstream and the upstream relationship to pornography.
Right.
Because talking about pornography without talking about social media makes no sense, and vice versa.
Hmm.
And we know when we go lecture on lecture tours and we speak to, say, for example, parents, their biggest fear is now the phone. I mean, the battles over the phone, when to use it, the
Right.
fear parents have, because, if a kid takes their phone into their bedroom, how many people you're inviting into that bedroom with
Yeah,
that kid?
so many.
Uh, because wherever kids are, predators are, as we know.
Exactly.
So I think it really allowed us to say, okay, this is not just about pornography,
Hmm.
and this is not just about social media, but the two have connected almost seamlessly now.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember you telling me you gave a talk, and some of the kids even saw Pornhub as just an extension of social media,
Oh,
not
absolutely.
pornography.
Yeah, absolutely. It was just another platform to them. It was just another, OnlyFans, just another social media platform like TikTok, like Snap. And it was so crucial for parents to understand, for child advocacy centers to understand what these platforms are, how these kids are using, and really not to be the enemy of social media, just to say, like, here's how kids are using it.
Mhm.
Here's how we could use it safely. Even by design, though, we have to understand that some of these industries are predatory by
Yes,
design,
by design.
right? So we have to understand that. But if they are going to, be on these platforms, then there has to be some safety features. Parents have to know what's going on, right? We have to know the harms. We have to know where we can go, how we can navigate that, and then just when to say no, right? Just when to say no, this platform is not safe.
Yeah.
And be able to hold that boundary and be okay with it.
And it's asking a lot of parents and an enormous amount of young people,
Right.
because in a way, they've had to navigate this and figure it out. Very few, I think, of their trusted adults. And again, this is not to put blame on them, but they don't know about pornography. They don't know about Instagram and Discord and the gaming sites as well. It's very hard to know how to conduct conversations between, say, parents and kids.
Yeah.
And we know that kids would rather be anywhere in the world than talking to their parents about pornography. But it's critical to start young. So can you talk a bit about that? How you do it? Because obviously with a 5 or 6 year old, you're not going to sit down and talk about pornography or show
Right.
pornography. You have to scaffold it. So,
Right.
can you talk about some of the work that you've been doing with us?
Yeah, it's really important that when we talk to parents, we say it's never too late, never too early to start those conversations. And luckily for them, we have courses to help them get started. So be educated about this, know something. Even if you review a fact sheet on our website, it's important to understand just a few of those harms, how pornography can affect the developing brain. Like, that is critical to understand. How it harms your sexual scripts, right? How it determines really like how we're viewing ourselves, how we're comparing ourselves to the porn performers, the way we think about our bodies and what we should look like and what we shouldn't look like, the way we think sex should be, our first time experiences, what behaviors we should be expecting, how we should treat each other, what consent looks like in this culture, what protection should look like in this space, because we know in porn.
Well, I think as well, what really gets me is, these kids are developing their sense of themselves. This is exactly the time around, 10, 11, you're beginning to develop, adolescence hits. And yet they should be allowed to develop their sense of self, who they are, what they want, without the porn industry breathing down their neck, sort of monetizing and commodifying their bodies. So that's why I called my book, How Pornography Has Hijacked Our Culture, because this is something that is so important for healthy development, is adolescence, the time to try on different identities, the time to see if this works for you or that works for you. But how do you do it in a society where you're inundated, from social media to pornography, with images of the so-called perfect body, what sex should look like, how relationships should look like? I mean, these kids don't stand a chance to develop their own authentic sense of self. And I think at Culture Reframe, that's what we really want to do, is we want to provide resilience and resistance to pornography, so that, and to all the other images in the hypersexualized culture, so that they have what is rightfully theirs.
Right.
They own what is rightfully theirs. It's not the result of some, guys in LA or whatever.
Mhm.
It's rather their own. So, and I remember saying that to my son when he was younger. I said to him, I can't be with you all the time, checking what you're doing, and nor do you want me to be with you.
Mhm.
It's not healthy, because they do need to individuate, but the culture is not allowing that. And I said to him, we don't know who you're going to be sexually. You don't know yet, but it's going to develop, and it's going to reflect the wonderful adult that you're going to be.
Mhm.
But if you do look at porn, and remember, you have a choice.
Yeah.
Right. But we were having ongoing conversations at this point. I said, if you do look at porn, just remember that you are giving away something that you have not claimed ownership of yet. And you're giving it to them. And they do not have your best interests at heart.
Right.
We can
Not
tell
at
you that
all.
absolutely. So, I mean, there's many examples. We both have
Mhm.
sons, and what we have done with our kids,
Yeah.
and how we have helped provide them with the resistance to what's coming, so that they can say no to pornography.
Mhm.
And but also, along with that, we have to provide them with a critique, an analytical critique of what's going on.
Yes.
It's not good enough to say no, or to
Right.
punish and say, I'm taking your phone away,
Right.
or that. It has to come from their own sense of who they are.
And how do they get that when algorithms take over, right? And when they're constantly bombarded and there's peer pressure and there's this constant need to feel accepted and liked and
Mhm.
wanted,
Mhm.
and when I asked a group of sixth graders, how do you know what you like? None of them really knew, and the story goes, well, I don't know what I like until I go to TikTok and see what's popular and
Mhm.
what's trending. And that is what's on trend. Like, that's how kids know what they like, is what is popular. What does their influencer say?
Yeah,
What,
exactly.
and so that's really difficult because we haven't taken the time to know, right? Because they're being sold, right? They're being sold what they
From the
like
moment they
the moment
oh, they can
they
see
arrive,
images, yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so we have to be really critical of media and teach them those skills to be critical. And I think that that's a really important part of what we're teaching, is teaching those critical digital media literacy skills, not only to be safe online, but be critical of what you see and what you know and what you think you like. Who's selling you? What are they selling? What is this image, and do you really like that? And who's telling you
Well, you can
that you
do
like it?
both. I mean, I remember, again, when my son was growing up, and there was all these, summer films with the macho guy who's going to save the world. As he was growing up, it was then things like Die Hard and all of that.
Right.
And his friends were going to see these movies. So you can't take your kid out of the social milieu within which they live.
Yeah.
But I remember he'd go and see one of these films with his friends, and then he'd come home and I'd say, how was the movie? And he'd go on about how great it was. And,
Mm.
because in a way he's forming his own sense of self, and he could identify with some of the characters, etc. And I said, oh, and then I'd say, well, would I have liked it? And he said, Mom, you would have hated it.
Mm.
And I say, why? So out of his mouth would come this fantastic analysis, but it was Mom's. You see, he didn't want to,
Right.
because it wasn't cool at 11 to have this, analysis. So I could imagine in the theatre, he's sitting there as an 11-year-old boy enjoying it. And on the other hand, he's deconstructing it, going backwards and forwards.
Right.
And that's in a way what we want to do, is make them bilingual,
Mm.
that they can enjoy some media. Obviously, pornography is not included in that, but they can also, and we do this, how many times I watch stuff and I enjoy it, and at the same time I'm critiquing it and
Mhm.
understanding it. And you can do both. It doesn't
Right.
mean you have to hate all media. It
Right.
just means that you are furnished with a set of skills that go beyond the narrative of what the story is in the movie or whatever, so that
Right.
you can build resistance to their narrative.
Right.
And the work you do with your kid and the way that you approach these issues with phones is that they also have a need at that age to belong. And you cannot cannot lock them in a cage or a cave or whatever you want to do and say, the culture's too toxic. You can't do that.
Even though we want to.
Yeah, even though, of
we want to
course.
we want to keep them in and keep them bubble wrapped. I think that we also need to remember that we can teach consent at any age. Consent maybe looks differently with different ages and stages of development. Yeah. Consent grows. Those conversations grow with our children. So whether that's, who's in your bubble, who's allowed in your space, whether or not you're forced to give hugs or kisses to your relatives, right? Sitting on Santa's lap or the Easter Bunny or whoever that is. No, he smells like weird coffee and, beans or whatever it is. We need to be able to hear the no from children and be able to nurture that and accept that. And and I think that that's so important to scaffold that learning. And consent is harder in a culture where you're socialized to say yes as girls.
Totally.
And
you have to front load it.
Right. And boys,
because
you're not hearing.
In the beginning, you're the smartest, most wonderful person in the world to your kids. And then by 13 or 14, you become the biggest idiot they've ever met. They do come back, right? They do come back. But, front loading is absolutely crucial because, their need in adolescence to separate and to become who they are in a way requires, unfortunately in this culture, a separation. If you do the work early on, and then in adolescence you have to be very careful what you do because you don't want to alienate your kid. And also you're setting up the sort of template for the kind of relationship you're going to have when your son or daughter becomes an adult. So you really don't want to mess up that period, but it's a very stressful period for parents and for the kids.
Yeah, and we mess up, that's just what we do. And sometimes, a lot of the times, you just own it, right? You're like, man, I really messed that up and I'm sorry. I think kids don't hear that enough from us, that, man, really screwed that up. I missed that chance to say, I missed that opportunity to say that, or I didn't know better, and I didn't know, and it's never too late.
No, it's never.
Right? It's never too late.
As long as you make repair.
Yeah,
it is never too late.
Right?
It is never too late.
And I think that that's one of the biggest life lessons maybe that I've learned too, doing this work as well as parenting, is just, man, own it. Just own it and mess up. And especially with these conversations, you can say, I wish my parents would have talked to me. I wish I would have had this conversation, or I did and it didn't go well, or this was my first time experience and I just want yours to be better.
Well, a lot of it's not going to go well.
Yeah, you're going to screw up a million times with these things. It's going to be awkward for
you. Can have doors slammed on you maybe, or
oh, bro.
Yeah, not again, here she goes. Yeah. Or, so, and also fathers, we're talking about women, mothers, but fathers play a crucial role in being a role model. And what we really need fathers to do is to be a role model that shows gentleness and kindness and warmth, and not this pushing into the macho male. When I'm sure your kid and my kid, when they were doing soccer or something, you'd have parents yelling, screaming at the kids and what have you. And we really need to think about, you need to parent intentionally, very intentionally. And I think when we did our parents program, that was one of the goals, was to really say to parents, we know this is a humbling experience to be a parent. We know it's overwhelming, especially when you're looking at phones and worried about porn sites. So what we said at Culture Reframed is, we're here to hold your hand. You're not alone. Right? We have created these programs for you, and all of our stuff is free. That's one thing that we wanted to do at Culture Reframed, irrespective of income. We wanted everyone to have access to our programs, which, as I always say, is a lousy business model, but at least everybody gets to see these. Right. And they're used all over the world, and being translated into Turkish. We're working with other groups to translate into Spanish, etc. So what we really, I think, at Culture Reframed wanted to do is to say to parents, it's daunting, but we're here.
Mhm.
to help you. And then we wanted to say the same things to nurses and doctors and lawyers. I mean, when you think of all the different groups that we have spoken with,
Mhm.
you know, and I don't think there's a group we've been to where afterwards they're not kind of shocked and
Yeah.
anxious. And then what we try and do is take down that by offering all the resources. Do you want to talk about some of the
Yeah.
resources on our website?
Interested in having Culture Reframe present at your event? Our expert speakers share the latest knowledge and resources that help ensure young people build resilience and resistance to hypersexualized media and pornography. Visit culturereframe.org to learn more.
Yeah, I'd love to. So, on our website, which is cultureframe.org, we have a ton of programs. So, we have our courses for parents, which are parents of tweens, which is 9 to 12, and teens, which is 13 and beyond. And they're loaded with resources, conversation scripts, videos, informational guides, lots of stuff that really help guide you through what this industry looks like, what the message is, what
Mm,
they're selling our kids, what the harms are from a
mm,
science-based perspective, has links to our academic library, which is jam-packed full of tons of research-based articles
yeah.
that really give you
And
like a
fact sheets for those who don't want to read
right, and fact sheets
academic,
that
yeah.
break that research down. Those parent courses are really a great way to really dive deep. So you can go in for a couple hours or a couple weeks
Yes.
really and spend your time. So those are free on our platform. And then for educators, we developed a porn critical sex education curriculum. And that was developed because educators in the UK came to us because they were mandating sex education for kindergarten through 12th grade. And they wanted something that was different, that offered a porn critical lens, something different from the regular sex and relationship education curriculum that they get, that takes an anti-exploitation framework that has actual training modules for educators. And this is really good for not only school teachers, but those that are going into classrooms, into schools, that work in prevention, that do after school programs. So we've seen a lot of different people use this, and even for parents who just want to look at what does teaching sex ed look like.
Yeah.
How can I get some digital literacy education? So there's some digital literacy modules in there as well. So that's a really great resource. That's on our website. And then for our child advocacy centers and our child serving professionals, we worked for about a year and a half, and we worked with 25 to 30 experts in the field of child advocacy. So we've got forensic interviewers, forensic examiners, SANE nurses, which are sexual assault nurse examiners, those that are in the medical profession. Yeah. So a ton of professionals that are working in child advocacy. We went to them and we said, what can we do to help you do your job better?
Well, they actually came to us.
And yeah, they came, well, we came to them, they came to us. We were doing a lot of work with them. And, we just started to develop a ton of resources, like fact sheets for them, for victims advocates.
Protocols for forensic interviews.
Protocols, screening interviews, different screening tools. They recorded interviews with each other. So the law enforcement were interviewing forensic interviewers. We've got a really great forensic interviewing protocol and sample sheets, like tons of information in a resource bank. So doing telemental health for those people who are doing telemental health. So that is all on our website, a link to our learning management system. We've got fact sheets. We have links to books and our YouTube channel. We do webinars. There's tons of things that we do in bite-sized, digestible pieces. That if you have
and now adding these podcasts,
now doing these podcasts where we hope to just talk to people because starting conversations is so important.
Want to keep up with Culture Reframed? Sign up for our free monthly newsletter to receive updates on our work, alerts of upcoming events, and the latest news related to pornography and youth. We look forward to connecting with you. To sign up, visit our website at culturereframed.org.
So this is really the introductory one to give you a sense of what we do. We will be doing more and more, and we'd like to hear from you as well. I mean, you can get to us on our website, just fill in a form and you can contact us and tell us what you'd be interested to hearing. Because, we've got lots of ideas, but we also want to hear from you of what particular issue would you like us to focus on? What's bothering you? Where do you need help? Because we want this as a public service. That's what we do. And wherever we go, we know that people are overwhelmed, adults, with this, as are the young people. And so we really want you to think of us as a public service, and a way to sort of work through what the main issues are and, to stretch our hand out to you and say, we're here, we're going to help. So don't be afraid to write to us or anything. Mandy and I will be speaking to different people. We're going to have lots of guests from different fields on. We're going to look at the whole ecosystem of media, pornography, social media, and all of it around how it impacts boys, girls, the culture. So that's the levels on which we work on: the micro level, the macro level, the in-between level. And I think everyone at Culture Reframed is dedicated to seeing this as a child protection issue. And we'll be talking about, indeed, the legal system and the age verification, and explain what those laws are. So please feel free to contact us. This is the beginning of our podcast. We're excited about this, to launch this, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the P Word podcast, Beyond the Talk. For the latest news and free resources for addressing the harms of pornography to youth, we invite you to join our online community at culturereframe.org. Be sure to subscribe to the P Word podcast wherever you get your podcasts to be notified of our next episode's release. And remember to keep going beyond the talk, because this isn't about one big talk. It's about ongoing conversations without shame, without blame, by boldly tackling the issue head on. This is the P Word Podcast.